Okay, everyone. My name is Bert Lohufgaida, and I'm kind of the moderator in this breakout room, but I won't be speaking a lot. I get the pleasure of introducing Marty Granger. But before I do that, let me just mention a couple of housekeeping issues. If you see down there, there's a chat, and I've put in that chat a couple of pieces of information. At 12 noon, there is a prayer time, and if you'd like to participate in that, you can go to that link. And also, I put in the chat an email address to which you can send any prayer requests that you might have. And also, the last thing I put in there, if you want to get active in a local ministry in Charlotte, there is a link there to fill out a form. You can share with us what your interests are, and someone will contact you. So let me introduce real quick to you, Marty Granger. Marty is a native from North Virginia that moved down to Charlotte in 2011. And he has been pouring his life into men for a long time. He's been involved in a lot of different ministries. And he is married, and this I really admire, for 52 years to his wife. Next week, I have my 25th wedding anniversary, so I don't know how you make it to 52, but that's great. He has two children and 6 grandchildren and a great grandchild. In 1990, he started pouring into men with the National Center of Fathering. He's done work with Great Dads. In the DC area, he's been with the Coalition of Men's Ministries. He's worked for Promise Keepers and National Coalition of Ministries to Men. So a whole lot of experience working with men. And today I'm told he's going to talk to us a little bit about what it means to be a grandfather. So with that, I will turn it over to Marty and let him take it away.
Thank you, Bert. Glad to meet you and glad to meet the men here of Charlotte through this conference. What I intend to do today is to just spend the next few minutes with us talking about the importance of being a grandfather when we talk about the issues that relate to fatherlessness. And I put together a PowerPoint today. I'm going to be using some slides to go through this so that there's something left after we're done talking. I've chosen for my topic today what I call the power of Papa, and I put a little asterisk there because you may be known or you may have been a grandfather that you call granddad, grandpa, gramps, granddaddy, pops, papa, bappa, whatever part of the country you came from or whatever your ethnic heritage is, might have a lot to do with what you're called as grandfather. But the topic and the thing that's on my heart today is to talk to grandfathers about the issue of connecting the generations in a disconnected world. And so I'm just going to start my first slide here. And I'm going to borrow a phrase from Forrest Gump, from the movie Forrest Gump, and paraphrase it by saying, grandfathers are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. First of all, the idea here is that we don't get to choose our grandparents. We don't get to choose our parents, but we do get to make choices in our own life. And in my case, my grandfather was a working man. He was a Depression era man. He worked very hard, worked all of his life with his hands. And he had 6 children. And then he had 38 grandchildren. On my dad's side of the family, my grandfather had 38 grandchildren. So I was one of many. And on my other side, my mother's father died before I was old enough to even know him. So as I grew up, I really only had one grandfather. So you never know. Every one of us has a different kind of life experience as we look back on our own grandfathers. I asked a friend of mine, a colleague, a former colleague named Dave, if he would send me a little quote about his grandfather, because I remember him telling me years ago the impact that his grandfather had on his life. And so here's a quote from Dave that he sent me recently. He said, "My father was a pastor's kid. He was a rebel, he was undisciplined, and he never really grew up, and he was largely absent in my life. I grew up without a model or a mentor, and yet I was determined not to be like my father. Only later in life, I realized that the Lord had given me a shadowy example to follow, my grandfather, who had failed in many ways to father his own son, but he left an unpretentious legacy of godly character and gospel ministry to me. God proclaims his works to the generations, often through our grandfathers." So the point here is that we don't get to choose who our grandfather is or what kind of legacy we've been left, but we do get to choose what kind of man we're going to be and the kind of man that God would have us to be godly grandfathers. So let me go to the next slide here. And this is what I call the 18-minute challenge. I'll get my slides straightened out here in a moment. Because we have about 18 minutes together, there's 4 different questions that I want to go over with you today. The first is, why is being a godly grandfather important? The second is, what are some common obstacles that keep us from connecting effectively with our grandchildren and with other young people that are in our lives? Third question, what are some practical things that we can do now to leave a lasting legacy of faith and faithfulness to our grandchildren? And then finally, what resources are available to help us connect and stay connected with our own grandchildren and with the other young people that happen to be in our lives? So let's start by asking the question, why is being a godly grandfather so important? And I've got 5 bullet points here, things for you to think about today, things that I think about quite often in my role as a grandfather. As Bert said, I have 2 adult children that are both in their 40s, and I have 6 grandchildren. My daughter has 2 older granddaughters. I have 2 older granddaughters that are in their 20s. One is 28 and one is 24. The 28-year-old had a baby less than a year ago, so my wife and I are now great-grandparents. So we've got even a new role that we're fitting into and finding out what it's all about. But we have the 2 older granddaughters. And then my son has 4 children, lives here in Charlotte, and works with me. And my son Tim has a son who is 14, a son who is 11, and twins that are 8 years old. So in my grandparenting journey right now, they go from 8 to 28. So it's a pretty good spread. And frequently and increasingly frequently, my role as a grandfather is important to me. I think about it a lot. I talk to my wife about it a lot. And I wonder if I'm living up to or falling short of what God would have me to be as a godly grandfather. But here's why it's important. First of all, being a grandfather is God's way of blessing all generations. Second of all, it fosters respect for the elderly and wisdom for the young. Third, it serves as a valuable link in understanding between the past and the present and the future. Fourth, it provides roots that in turn provide identity and stability to families. And this is really important in this issue of fatherlessness, that being a grandfather in place in the life of your grandchildren provides them with roots that will help establish their identity and give them stability as they begin to grow and create their own families. And then finally, it nurtures a sense of belonging and unity that is so essential for emotional and spiritual well-being for a child. Can't underestimate that. I have a quote here by Dr. Marianne Diorio that I thought was really appropriate for our conversation today on grandparenting, on grandfathering. It's this. Here's the quote. Throughout the scriptures, the older generation is commanded to instruct the younger generation in the ways of God, and the younger generation is commanded to learn from the older generation. This is not to say that the young cannot teach the old. And Dr. Diorio says, I've learned more from children, especially my own, than any other age group. But it is to say, however, that the older generation has a mandate from God to teach the younger generation to know him. How can this happen unless the generations interact? We live in a disconnected world, and there's many things that fight against this, fight against us being involved effectively with our grandchildren. So our purpose here today is just a quick reminder of the importance of being connected in all the ways that we can be connected to our grandchildren. Here's some common obstacles that we all face in life that have to do with grandparenting. Again, 5 bullet points. First of all is time. And I put it this way, grandchildren grow up fast and we grow old even faster. Time seems to get away from us, and the older we get, we ask the question, where's the time gone? It seems like yesterday that we were married. It seems like yesterday first child was born. It seems like yesterday first grandchild was born, and here they are. In my case, one of them is 28 years old. Where did the time go? Because we seem to be the same, but time seems to be moving on so fast. A second obstacle is distance. For the last 50, 60 years in our culture, we've lived in a very mobile society. And so we often, many grandparents live at prohibitive distances from our grandchildren, from their own grandchildren, making it difficult to walk with them, hug them, touch them, laugh with them, to actually be with them. Distance is a big issue. Also, there are family issues that are very real in the life of any grandparent. Broken families, blended families, even hostile children can make it difficult for us to connect with our grandchildren. Not everything always goes smoothly in every family, and sometimes it's very awkward and it's very difficult for us to connect with grandchildren just because of life circumstances. I'd also add to that in our culture, it's very true that in our society, values, the things that are important in our culture are changing at light speed. And this too inhibits communication, and it inhibits mutual respect from generation to generation. Because after all, you remember when you were young, I remember when I was young, that our parents knew nothing. So our grandparents certainly knew even less than that. And yet here we are wanting to respect and learn wisdom from the older generation, but there really is a cultural disconnection. And I also want to add here briefly that another common obstacle for those of us that are believers in Christ, those of us that are followers of Christ, is that the church is often unwittingly an obstacle for us to be connected to our own grandchildren and our children, the children in our churches and in our generation, in our communities, because lately the churches have been segmenting everyone into age groups. I'm in the senior group, and my children would be in the married adult group, and then there's the college group and the high school group, middle school group, and church for the elementary school kids. So the church has a role too, an important role in bringing the generations together and fostering mutual respect and mutual love for one another. So these are some of the obstacles: time, distance, family issues, culture, and the church. So briefly, I want to look at um, some practical things that we can do right now. I'm going to move through these kind of quickly, but that's why I put them in a PowerPoint so they would be here afterwards. I polled a group of men that I meet with on Wednesday mornings that are grandfathers, and I said, what's some advice that you have for the men that I'm going to be talking to in this workshop? And they said, well, one of them said something that stuck with me, and I thought I would include it here. And what he said was, play with your grandchildren when they're young so that when they're older, they'll talk to you. Play with them when they're young, they'll talk to you when they're older. Now, there's some limitations to that too, but when you are with your grandchildren, it's important to get down at their level. So if they're really small, you get really small. As they get bigger, you get bigger with them, and you play with them, and you're active with them. And your goal is that when they're older and when they become teenagers and beyond and young adults, that they can talk to you when they need to. Second of all, pray for them daily and pray with them occasionally when you are with them. Let them see you and let them hear you walking and talking with God. Be visible in your walk with God. Be visible in your faith in front of them. And don't be ashamed to let them know that you love God and that you want them to love God. Third, stay with them through their trials and their triumphs. You're in a unique position where you're the one, you're not disciplining your grandchildren, you're walking beside them, you're walking behind them, you're believing in them, you're reminding them of what it means to be your grandchild, what it means to be a child of God. You know, there's a popular saying, it's said that God has no grandchildren. He only has children, sons and daughters by faith in Christ. Well, that's because being the grandfather is your job, and the legacy is your job, and the connection is your job. And then last of all, I would say that you want to be sharing stories and showing pictures. When I was doing fathering seminars a number of years ago, I would always say the two most important things you can have are a kitchen table and a camera. Well, the kitchen table now is maybe a more difficult thing to have as a grandparent. But you can certainly have a camera, you can take pictures, you can reminisce, you can bring back memories. Your job is to be the family memory that connects the generations together. I've included some resources here for you that are interested on where you might be able to go to get some advice, some counsel, and some information on godly grandparenting. And I've listed a few here. The National Association for Grandparenting is found at grandkidsmatter.org. The Legacy Coalition is another group that they have an annual summit where they bring together issues on grandparenting, the legacycoalition.com. The Christian Grandparenting Network with Gavin Harper, christiangrandparentingnetwork.net. And then some books, Extreme Grandparenting by Tim Kimmel, Championship Grandfathering by Carrie Casey and Dr. Tony Evans, Live to Leave a Legacy by a friend of mine, Dr. Dan Erickson, who's gone on to be with the Lord, but a good book out of his own experience. Grandfathering, Strengthening Your Family, Passing on Your Faith, with Dr. Josh Mulvihill. Dr. Josh Mulvihill. These are just a few resources. But if you're interested, you can go online and you can find more resources that are available to you to be a godly grandparent. Our mandate, our mission is found in Psalm 145, chapter 4. It says it this way: one generation commends your work to another. They tell of your mighty acts. And then one last thing that I would leave you with is this, what I call a final warning on the somber note, that there is an aggressive movement in our nation and our culture to turn the hearts of our children away from God in order to create a secular society, governed not by men and women who love God and love the laws of God as revealed in the Bible, but rather by the will of godless men and women. This is coming on fast, and as grandparents, we need to be aware of this. As the godly grandfather, you are a bulwark against this tide of evil. And remember, it only takes one generation to forget God. You can be the one to make an eternal difference in a child's life. you can be the man that makes a difference for now and for eternity. So thank you very much for being with me. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Again, my name is Marty Granger with Ministry Alliance. Great to be with you today. Thank you.
Marty, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Bert.
Yeah, great. Had a question by Monte, and for some reason we weren't able to see your slides. So we're recording this session, and it will be posted so people can go back and listen to it or share it with a friend. But is there a way to get a copy of your slides? Do they email
yes,
you? Or?
You can email me and I can send them to you. How much time do we have left, Bert?
We've got about 7 minutes.
You know what? Let me try something here, okay?
And while you're doing that, maybe you can answer the question, when is it appropriate to give your kids advice on how to raise their own kids? So how to raise your grandkids. Is that even permitted?
Well, that depends on the relationship you have with your children. I know some personal situations where there are parents who, for some reason, they don't want their own parents telling their grandchildren anything about how to live, particularly in the faith area. I think you should give advice when you're asked, and otherwise you stand by. I think it's very, it can be very dangerous in a family to overstep the bounds. I think you have to talk to your own children about, get their permission, and how would they like you to build into their children? What role do they want you to play? It's not a good idea to give advice when you're not asked. Otherwise, hostility can grow there. So I think that starts with your relationship with your children.
Okay.
Right?
Do you want to give the participants your email in case they want a copy?
Yeah, yes. It's very simply Marty. It's MARTY at ministry-alliance.org. Marty at ministry-alliance.org. That's the organization I'm with. And if we have a couple of seconds here, I think I've recovered the slides. I could just go through them very quickly.
Yeah, we've got a couple minutes if you want to do that.
Okay, well, this is what I'll be sending them if they want them, okay? This is the quote from my friend Dave. This is what I call the 18-minute challenge. These are the questions that we went over today about the why and the what of being an effective, godly grandfather. And then why is it important? It's all on one slide. And then the common obstacles that we talked about: time, distance, family, culture, church. And then some things we can do. I tried to make them alliterative so we could remember them: to pray and to play, to pray, to stay, and then to share stories with our family. And then this is the list of the resources. So those are the slides that I provided, and I'm sorry that they didn't come through the way they should have, but
that's all right. We had a question from Carl. Apparently his grandkids live further away. So how do you overcome the distance issue if your grandchildren live further away?
Well, I think for one thing, you have to, if you're an older gentleman like I am, you have to stay on top of this technology and use the technology to connect with them. You can use FaceTime if you have an iPhone. You can use this technology that we're using today called Zoom. There's lots of ways, because the younger generation is technologically savvy, and you can connect with them. You can connect with them online. You can email them if they have an email address. You can write to them. You can send them things. There's lots of ways. Remember special occasions. Let them know that you're there as much as possible.
Okay, and at what age is it appropriate to start sharing your faith, and how do you do that?
I think you start sharing your faith with your grandchildren when you sense that they're old enough to understand. I think the moment you can begin telling them stories and you can begin telling them about how God has worked in your life, how you weave into your conversations who you are, you share your faith from the time they're born. You share when you get specific with them about how they can come to know Christ and how they can experience God's love. When you feel that they're ready, some may be ready at 8 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, maybe not till their teenage years. But the way that you engage in these conversations with your grandchildren is to ask them questions. Ask them lots of questions and get them to think, not just to recite things or believe things that are, quote, religious, but talk to them in terms of a relationship with God and ask them good questions about what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they think. What do they think when they look up into the sky? What do you think is out there? Who do you think made all this? And start challenging their brains and their hearts with questions. That's my advice.
Have you ever had to discipline a grandchild, and how did your kids
No,
react to that?
no, I don't think it's our role to discipline a grandchild, other than if you call telling them not to jump all over the furniture in your house, if you call that disciplining, you just smile and say, don't jump on the couch. This is the way we do things here. It's up to the parents to train their children. Disciplining children is really another word for discipline is training. They're the ones that are the trainers, okay? We're the ones that are the coach behind the coach, if you will. So yes, when they're in our home, we have certain standards, certain things we want them to do. We just lovingly correct them, but it's not our role. We are not the main disciplinarians unless we're raising our grandchildren. And there's many grandparents that are doing that today. God bless them, God love them. And then they have that primary responsibility if they are the main influence in their lives.
Great. Well, Marty, we really appreciate you sharing your experience and wisdom with the group. And if anyone wants to contact you, what's the best way to do that again?
It's Marty at ministry-alliance.org. Okay? It's been a pleasure to be a part of this Man Up conference, and I think there's a lot of meat here for men to grab onto, and I hope they'll come back and make use of it.
Great. Thank you. And bless
Thank you.
everybody that's been on. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.